I'll just give you just tell you a little bit about what happened, and then I'm going to read some of the book to you tonight, so, which is a really big deal for me, so I'm getting myself ready to do that. I went back for 2 months on the premise that the snow didn't start until Thanksgiving. It started on November 3rd. I went back to the cabin, which is way up in northern Washington, in the middle of the state there, and when I left, I had just finished the year 2008. I'm starting from 71, writing sequentially. 2008, that's when I finished, when I left in August. And I just walked right in and sat down, and I wrote 2009, but a year ago, I'd made a commitment to go back east. So after, I don't know what it was, 4 or 5 days, I had to drive to Seattle and then fly to wherever it was, New Hampshire. And then I did 10 or 12 days with those groups there. They have Rhode Island, Maine, Boston, New York, and just had a great time. They have these real live wire leaders there, mostly women, and super peppy, fun. And the Rhode Island group just bought a little church, just right on the road, this little, small, really old church, just a one room, but it's very nice, and they just fixed it up. And already it's completely changed everything because they're just right on the road now. We all know how that is. So that was very, very exciting. And then I just flew back to Seattle, just got in my car and went back to Solitude. And I didn't even have the horses this time because they took them away, because it was winter. So I just was in this just completely isolated, no internet. And when I get in there, something happens and I can just completely concentrate. I know when Swami wrote The Path, he had to be in seclusion to do it. I'd like to see if I can work here. I'm in a different phase. I finished. I got all the way through to 2013. Yeah, and so that was like the first draft, and that was somewhere in October, mid-October that I did that. I felt really, from 2000 on, I felt really good. I just felt like it was happening. So then I went back to the beginning, and I anticipated. I knew that the 1970s were very confused because it took me about 15 years to figure out that it had to be absolutely chronological. And so the 70s were all over the map, in my usual way. And so I had to go back and restructure it. But re-editing a first draft is entirely different than trying to find it from all those boxes. So I worked through the 70s, and I'm up now to, I just finished 83 is where I am. The 80s are actually worse than the 70s. They're chronological, but they're just, that was where I was really bogging down, and then I was rescued by the house. But I began to gain confidence in what I'm doing, which was, all of you were here the last time I talked. I unburdened myself to you about how complicated this has been for me personally. But somehow I think that we've turned a corner on it. I was saying to someone, I visited Daiva and Gangamata because I didn't want to go through Bend. I was afraid of the weather. So I went to the coast and visited with them. And let's see, what was the thought I had? Oh, yes. I was saying that, I started listening to Autobiography of a Yogi on tape, but even that was a little dicey. I can't come anywhere near the path. Because if I come anywhere near the path, it's a work of genius. And so the gap is too great. But somehow or another, I feel comfortable now that I'm doing what I can do. And whatever it is, it's just what I can do. And the book also, it's really clear to me what it is. It's like at least a third of the book, and it may actually be half the book, is Swami's words. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of what I've ended up doing is just, putting it in sequence. The mere fact that it's his words doesn't mean that anybody either remembers them or ever heard them. Some of them are out of my own notes, so therefore they were things, or emails that didn't go to a lot of people. Some of it is from letters that were published, but heavens, some of you weren't even born when he wrote them. and others, you just read them, and he was so dynamic, you just couldn't possibly keep up. And even still, I, who paid close attention, am startled by what I find. So the purpose of the book has become much more specific, and that's one of the reasons I feel more comfortable. I know I said this before, but now I really see it. I'm making a long list of what he did, because a great deal of what he did is not remembered, and a great deal of what he did is something that we all are going to want to work with later on. And just getting his thoughts about lots of different things in order, and also just sort of feeling what the trajectory of that life was. That's where the chronology becomes really important. I don't have a personal story in it, but Swami himself kind of came in like a wave, so that by the time I finished to the end of his life and then went back to the beginning, it was more obvious to me what the book was doing. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because by the end he was so different than he was at the beginning that I could see what the story was. And I also began to realize it's just a lot of his own words. Why wouldn't it be? Because what he had to say is more interesting than what I have to say. So there's really not too much else, because all I did was the same thing as I did before. I just got up in the morning and I just worked until I couldn't work anymore. Then I went to bed, and then I got up and I did it again. Seclusion is really terrific if you have either the capacity to meditate with that kind of zeal or something to work on like this. And it's just, I know it sounds silly, but seclusion is really a good idea for them.
Someone should build a retreat.
Yeah. Well, I'm ready to just read you a chapter or two. Are you
Yes.
ready? Okay, I have not shared a single sentence of this book with anyone. So two things will happen. Either you will say, wow, that's good. Or you'll say, oh, that's nice, Asha. Really? And you say, there's more of it where that came from. So sorry to hear that. But I need to hear it. You know, I need to hear it in your minds now. Do you know what I mean?
You can always make it required reading and we'll soldier through it.
That's good.
How many chapters is the book?
Yeah, how long do you think?
Well, Diva asked me, so I looked it up. It's 226,000 words.
Whoa.
It's about, I don't know how the manuscripts go. It's 800 or so manuscript pages. Lakshman, do you remember? If it's this typeface? Yeah, I don't know.
We can't wait as long as you want to make
You know, it just, at a certain point, it was who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I've been reading Doris Kearns' history books now, because I read, this history's and she wrote Team of Rivals about Abraham Lincoln and a number of others. Very, very good books. But she also does very long, complicated chronologies. And what she does is what I'm just doing here, which is, it's episodic, and there's just space between each of the parts, because in June he did this, in July he did that, in January he was doing this, and there's no way to tie it together. And she leaves space, she puts a little dingbat, and then she puts a few words in caps. So I'm going to do this exactly the same, which I actually realized will also work, because so much of it is that you need to say, oh, that's what he said about the nature channels. That's what he said about the new retreat. And so it'll be easier for people to see. I find books sometimes hard to read if your mind doesn't get a pause. So anyway, that's what I'm working with. So I'm choosing here 1974. All right. And the book starts in 71 with me just arriving with Swami. That first chapter is very different, so I'm not going to read that one. And in about the fourth chapter of the book before this one, I explain how he was expelled from Self-Realization Fellowship. Because basically that's about the time I learned it. You know, I came in 71, and by the end of 72, I'd been with him enough where he talked about it. And it just was necessary to explain it because it's the premise of so much else that happens. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if there's anything else I'll have to tell you, but it is, everything you need to know is known by the time you get here. Okay? And the book is, I don't even think there are going to be chapter numbers. It's just going to be literally year by year. And what I'm hoping to do is to have some interesting quote that's contemporaneous with the year. But I don't think there'll be titles, and they'll just be as long as they are. So, in 1974, we bought the new land. He wrote Meaning in the Arts. He said a lot about creativity. He started writing his autobiography. He formed the first singing group. And he started, for the first of about 100 times, the Ananda Communities movement. The Banyan Tree is this newsletter that Swami himself used to write. It used to come out every month, every 2 months, or whenever we can afford to print it. That's actually what the masthead said. And he wrote it himself, and in his way, he just would, this one isn't a very personal one, but he was very personal. He'd just write whatever was going on and tell us all about it. So this one starts, the meditation retreat, Swamiji wrote in the Banyan Tree, has become far more popular than we ever dreamed it would be when we first bought the land. He's referring to the seclusion retreat. Originally intended as a place for serious meditators, people were now coming for a variety of reasons. To check out Ananda as a place to live, to get help in starting their own communities, for personal counseling, for purely social reasons, to spend time in the company of like-minded friends. On Sunday, people drive long distances just for the morning service. It's becoming a public church. When Swamiji bought the retreat land, it was a joint purchase with 4 other men. They each had 1 parcel. Swamiji had 3. The intention was a place for hermits. It was agreed that Swamiji could start Ananda there, then, when it outgrew those facilities, move it elsewhere. Within a year, the community had moved to the farm. The farm is the land where downtown Ananda is, and where the new retreat is, where the World Brotherhood retreat is now, is the new land, which is we bought in 1974. He thought he had more time for the retreat, but now its popularity had forced the issue. We began to look for land. The ideal piece was the Hoffman Ranch, right next to the farm. It was owned by a dentist in Los Angeles who rarely even visited, but he didn't want to sell. Absolutely not. We started negotiating for a piece down the road. We didn't have any money, but moving the retreat, Swami, quote, was a personal responsibility I had taken on, Swamiji said. So we assumed God would find a way. A few days later, I was standing in line at the post office when I overheard a man I'd never seen before ask the clerk, "Do you know anyone from Ananda?" Assuming he was a guest looking for the retreat, I stepped forward and introduced myself. Then, to my astonishment, I heard myself saying, "So, you want to sell us your land?" It was Dr. Hoffman.
Wow.
Yeah. He'd had a change of heart and driven up from Los Angeles to talk with us. My intuition further convinced him that the land was meant to be ours. Quote, "I always dreamed of developing it in just the way Ananda is doing. I realize I'll never do it myself. I want you to have it." He offered us an unbelievable deal. No money down, $1,000 per month, no payments at all for the first year.
Wow.
The only catch was we had to buy it all. We had been looking for 30 acres. This was 10 times more than that. Of course, we said yes. The new land, it remained new for a decade, opened the door for 2 other projects Swamiji had long considered. First, a sanitarium. He wrote in the Banyan Tree, quote, "Rather than working against disease, we would work with the body's natural healing process, extending the idea of cooperation into the field of health. The patient would not be passive, but actively engaged in his own healing, cooperating with natural law and divine will," end quote. There could be allopathic physicians, Ayurvedic doctors, and other practitioners in tune with this method. Swami says, "I envision something small with low overhead and no sophisticated, costly equipment. Above all, it would be a place of loving service rather than merely a business relationship," end quote. Second would be an institute of cooperative spiritual living to support the growing community's movement. Swami says, there would be classes in how to found and operate communities like Ananda, including practical courses in establishing supportive industries. Students could apprentice in Ananda businesses in the school and on the farm. They could learn yoga philosophy and practices and study other spiritual traditions as well. We could offer a broad range of courses on cooperation itself in history, government, science, anthropology, and sociology. With the remaining land, we could double the population of Ananda from 200 to 400 people, a godsend for hard times. New section. Back in 1969, when word spread to Nevada City that a teepee village filled with hippies had sprouted 20 miles outside of town, a concerned editorial appeared in the local paper. Swamiji went to the office of the Union, the local paper, and said, "I am here to answer your ad." He gave them a letter to the editor. In his usual fashion, Swami trusted the readers with his whole heart. In the closing paragraphs of that letter, he wrote, "We have assumed this way of life with a sense of keen responsibility to society and with a loving desire to offer to others what we hope will be an example of peace and brotherhood, a first toddling step on the pathway to world peace. We ask from you, our neighbors, no favor but your friendship. We give you ours in return, and add to it our prayers that the peace of God that we have felt in these your hills may fill your hearts, that you may know from experience that under all the insecurities, fears, and aggravations of our times, God is not dead. He holds out his hand, calling to us in silence, but as urgently and as lovingly as ever in the days of Christ." Isn't that amazing? 1969 to the local paper.
Asha?
Yes.
You said with the new land, the community could double from 200 to 400. Were there 200 people there in the early 70s?
In 74?
That's high. I was just wondering.
It's a very good question.
Did you just mean capacity?
We didn't have a master plan, as I'm going to explain, so there was nothing in there.
Right.
So why would it?
I don't know.
No, why? Where would I have gotten that number from?
That's why I was wondering.
Yes, that's the communist. Where would I have gotten that number from? Gee, I don't
Sounded
know.
like you made it up.
That was a beautiful letter from Swami.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. He was so courageous, you see. 1969, he just walked in. They said there's hippies, there's a teepee village of hippies out there. And this is how Swami answers them.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this is sort of what you begin to get. He then went to the county office, assuming the editorial would also have piqued their interest. After some discussion, the officials, this is 1969, after some discussion, the officials decided Ananda was a church camp, which gave the health department sole jurisdiction. The inspector assigned to Ananda had spent years in developing countries. Primitive did not bother him. As long as health and sanitation were respected, in the first years he was the only county official we had to satisfy. Hal Cox, may he live in heaven forever. This was one of the many miracles of Ananda's beginning. If from the start we had been under the planning department, Ananda would never have gotten off the ground. In spring 1974, we went as usual to the health department with our plans for the new land. We were told that the county had reconsidered our status. Church camp no longer applied. From now on, we would have to meet the requirements of the planning department. Before anything could be done on the new land, we had to submit a master plan for the whole community. New section. When I was 18, Swamiji said, I had a revelation about meaning in art. As a consequence, I destroyed everything I had written to that point, then wrote 2 stories, The Singer and the Nightingale, and For What Was Man Made, now called Land of Golden Sunshine. His criteria for greatness in art, Swamiji explained in an essay for his English professor, was, quote, the quality of light that emanated from it. His professor flunked him, but Swamiji knew he was right. Quote, for the past 30 years, I've been trying to express what I understood in a flash at that time. It has been tremendously difficult. I spent a whole afternoon working on one paragraph. I understand it intuitively, but bridging my ideas in a way that others can follow, that is the challenge. End of quote. When he finally finished the essay, Meaning in the Arts, he said, I feel like a warrior after a battle, then hastened to add, a victorious warrior. He also did some editing on the two stories, then put the stories, his essay, and the play, Jewel in the Lotus, into one volume he called Tales for the Journey. Some spiritual traditions condemn all creativity as egoic. This is a misunderstanding, Swamiji said. You can't transcend the ego merely by suppressing it. Creativity is fundamental to the spiritual path. To grow spiritually, you must give of yourself, first to God, and then as He inspires you, to God in others. The devotee's constant prayer must be, Lord, help me to serve you better. When you ask God to work through you, all work, whether artistic or mundane, becomes creative. End of quote. Master set the example. He wrote poetry, music, an autobiography that is one of the best-selling spiritual books of all time. He interpreted ancient scripture in new ways. His Whispers from Eternity is a masterpiece of devotional literature. To share India's teachings in a country where they were virtually unknown required great creativity. He crisscrossed the country, filling the largest halls in the major cities with topics like highest science of super concentration and all-round success, Yogoda muscle will system of physical perfection, mastering the subconscious mind by super consciousness, divine healing prayer vibrations administered by Swami to the entire audience. Where is Jesus now and what is he doing? No wonder people came. In India, the guru is supported by his disciples. In America, Master had to support both himself and his disciples. He started a goat milk dairy, a carrot juice factory, a flower farm, and he bought a papaya grove. At a time when vegetarianism was virtually unknown, he opened 2 vegetarian cafes featuring recipes of his own invention. Mushroom burgers were a particular favorite. During World War II, when meat was rationed, and Master was struggling for money, as always, he became concerned for all those meat eaters who would now feel deprived. His constant prayer was, how can I serve? He had the idea to extract gluten from wheat and use it as a meat substitute. It became one more cottage industry for Mount Washington. Later, he gave his recipes to the Seventh-day Adventists, and their Loma Linda brand is popular to this day. Yeah. Swamiji said, the secret of prosperity is creativity. The opposite, poverty consciousness, is to be locked in a limited view of reality itself. If you think there is only one way to do something, and that fails, then you fail. Prosperity consciousness is to see an infinity of possibilities. If your first idea doesn't work, you try another one. If that fails, you keep on generating ideas until you find the one that does succeed. That is how Master was. He tried many things just to get the energy going in the right way. They make a mistake in SRF, taking what he did too literally. Swami goes on, like Master, much of the time I'm just getting energy going rather than dictating how a thing should be done. If I propose 9 ideas and someone comes up with a 10th that is better, let's go with the best idea. Too often people follow what I say dogmatically instead of creatively. Then they hold me responsible when it doesn't work out. Positive thinking, this is still Swami, positive thinking is part of it. When I say we'll sell thousands of copies of a book or have 200 guests for Spiritual Renewal Week, it is part of keeping the right affirmation. But when it doesn't happen that way, some people think I'm just a dreamer. That isn't the case. One reason we don't sell thousands of books or have 200 guests is because most of you think it's impossible. I'm the only one who believes we can. If I didn't affirm that 200 people would come, we wouldn't have even the 30 who do. If all of you thought as I do and worked as hard as I do, we could attract millions. On another occasion, I was startled to hear Swamiji say, prosperity will be Ananda's greatest test. How could that be? I asked in astonishment. He says, when things come easily, people often stop putting out creative energy. Instead of thinking, what can I give, they begin to ask, what can I get? It doesn't happen overnight, but gradually a selfish attitude sets in and the spirit is lost. Then he added, I'm not saying it will happen. I'm only saying it could happen. What will save Ananda is the constant prayer, how can I serve? This is still Swami's words all the way through. To be original is not to do something that's never been done before. It is to come from your own point of origin, from the heart of your own life experience. True creativity is an outward expression of the inspiration you feel inside. Otherwise, it is just an echo of what has been done before. Most people think of creativity as I want to create something or I need to express myself. I never feel the need to express myself. My only thought is, how can I serve? My way of creating is different. I ask God to help me express certain states of consciousness that I think would be of benefit to others. I think only of that consciousness, and it comes to me as words, music, photography, architecture, whatever it is I'm trying to do. I tune in to what is already there, then express it. It is a new understanding of creativity I hope to inspire others to try. When the essay was done, Swamiji went into seclusion. I feel the most important thing for me now is to prepare myself inwardly to face the hard times ahead. Meditation is my priority. In the previous chapter, he wrote The Road Ahead, and he talked about the cataclysmic events. Okay, now another section. By the middle of March, he was ready for a break. He thought of taking a few days in Carmel, an artist colony just above Big Sur on the California coast. Then a friend said, I'll pay for your trip to India if I can go along. That was John Messina. He's not anybody you all know. He's gone now. Swamiji agreed. Jyotish and 2 others joined the traveling party. It was Nalini and Shraddha Van Tobel. Shraddha's in the astral world now. Swamiji started with a week of programs in San Francisco and ended 2 months later with lectures in Europe. In between was India. Every 12 years in Hardwar there is a huge spiritual fair called a Kumbh Mela. Hundreds of thousands of people gather to bathe in the Ganges and receive darshan from the many saints and sadhus who come. It was there Swamiji would see Anandamoyi Ma. But when the others left for Hardwar, Swamiji stayed in Delhi. Several weeks into the trip, he had become ill. Swami said, I told them not to expect me. I was so weakened by dysentery I couldn't face the crowds. Just to be sure, I prayed to Ma, since the strongest reason to go was to see her. Immediately I felt her calling me to come. My strength returned remarkably. I knew I must go. They visited her encampment twice. Both times Ma came out specially to see them. There is great love between Swamiji and Ma, and joy in being together, Jyotish said. She talked with him for a long time and was very supportive, especially of his surrender to his guru's will. That was in reference to him getting kicked out of SRF. She had us sit in front of her, then tossed to each of us a little cloth-tied bundle of prasad. We asked her a number of questions, but she gave very short answers, mostly, ask your guru. Swamiji always directs us to Master as the guru. Only later did I realize she meant Swamiji. Ma made it clear that the responsibility for guiding us had been given by God to him. Swamiji returned to San Francisco May 18th, the day before his 48th birthday. In India, he wears an orange dhoti like a sadhu. Otherwise, he wears Western clothes, usually blue. When Swamiji got off the plane, his fellow passengers were bemused to see him showered with rose petals and then decked with garlands by the 24 devotees who had come to meet him. Soon after his birthday, he went back into seclusion. New section. After I had been with Master for about a year, Swamiji said, he began urging me to write down his sayings and parables, and hinted that he expected me someday to write about him. In his own autobiography, he revealed much of the path as seen through the eyes of a great soul, but could not speak of that great soul himself as he truly was, a perfected example of the divine teachings. The task of presenting him as a great master rather than a humble seeker after enlightenment belonged by right to his disciples. End of quote. After Master died, Swamiji wrote down from memory every conversation, story, and experience he hadn't already recorded. He also wrote down the recollections of others, and for years he meditated on the meaning of each word in each story. Much was conveyed, Swamiji said, by subtle nuance, his tone of voice, or the look in his eyes. Swamiji thought his own story of how a more or less typical Westerner came to be the disciple of a great guru might also be helpful to people. Master had encouraged him to write that as well. Eventually, Swamiji decided to combine the two, an autobiography of his search for truth and the fulfillment he found in Master. He began writing in 1971, but stopped when he realized, I haven't grown enough yet. 2 years later, he started again, wrote 2 chapters, then felt, not yet. For a year and a half, he meditated and prayed for guidance. Finally, in the summer of 1974, he began to write again. By that time, I was officially his secretary. I also had a day job at Pubble, Ananda Publications, which was really working for Swamiji too. He was our only author and closely supervised the business. Each month, he paid me $50 in cash from his own wallet. As a courtesy to Swamiji, I was exempt from community fees. I lived in a small trailer, cheap to begin with, now long since paid for. I had no car, no insurance of any kind. My only expenses were food, propane for heat, kerosene for light. Money went farther in those days, and I didn't find it difficult to be comfortable within my purse, as Sri Yukteswar recommended. When I did fall short, somehow I was always taken care of. I felt wealthy beyond the dreams of kings. Ayodhya, where Swamiji, I, and most of the monks and nuns lived, was about a mile from Pubble as the devotee walks, over the hill and through the woods. Communication then was by telephone or postal service, neither of which connected directly to Swamiji's house. If you wanted him to know something, you had to walk over the hill and tell him. In the late afternoon, every weekday and sometimes on Saturday, I, Seva, and a few others would bring Swamiji news, mail, and messages. The day he started working again on the autobiography, I found him sitting on the floor of his office amidst hundreds of pieces of paper of various sizes arranged carefully in stacks. Each was a note about Master, some handwritten, some typed. Swamiji had spent the day sorting and organizing them. He greeted me, but remained where he was on the floor. With a look of utter dismay, he said, "How am I ever going to turn all of this into a book about Master?" Later, he said, "I can't convey to you the kind of fear that came over me when I faced the enormity of the responsibility. How can the anthill describe Mount Everest?" But it was a duty from Master I had to fulfill. Too much depended on Swamiji for him to drop out completely, but as much as possible he spent his days in seclusion working on his autobiography. Swamiji went over every word scores of times. He would put the typed pages on a clipboard, move from his desk to a comfortable chair nearby, then hand-write whatever changes were needed. A quirk of his editing was that he had to have absolutely clean copy before he could be sure a page was done. Even one editorial mark meant the page had to be retyped. He was the only one who could do the writing and editing, but retyping I thought I could do for him. He was reluctant, though, to turn it over. Retyping often turned into more editing, and his handwriting, suffice to say, is not easy to decipher. What if I missed important changes? I pointed out that as his secretary, I had learned to interpret his scrawl, as he called it. I promised to double-check every page to be sure nothing was missed. About editing as he typed, the net result would still be a gain. He agreed to try it, and gradually he saw that I could be trusted, and he began to save the retyping for me. His entire house was the large dome, divided into office, sitting room, and sleeping loft by partitions that stopped far short of the high ceiling. He was out of sight in the office, but every sound could be heard, amplified by the dome. We always came in quietly so as not to break his train of thought. Sometimes he stopped work immediately. If he went on typing, we silently waited until he was done. He didn't always greet our arrival with the phrase, "To what do I owe this great honor?" But that spirit was there. I was never the secretary who comes to type his manuscript. I was his friend. A cup of tea, some relaxing conversation. Only then did we get down to business. Even the requests he made were proffered first as hints, respecting my freedom to accept or refuse. Our afternoon visits regularly extended through dinner, sometimes late into the night, so I never made any other plans. Serving him was not my first priority. It was my only priority. And he knew it. Still, he never presumed, nor did I. People speak grandly of having no expectations, but it is a hard ideal to live up to. Habit takes over. You are my husband, wife, child, secretary, therefore. Even unspoken expectation is there. God's joy is ever new. Yesterday may hint at what today will bring, but can never define it. Swamiji's delighted surprise at our showing up once again at the appointed hour was no affectation. He encouraged us in his own practice. Every night, give back to God your little part of his creation. When morning comes, whatever comes with it is his gift to you, not yours by right. New section. 12 singers, with 3 guitars and a flute, had come together in a group called the Gandharvas, the celestial musicians. Swamiji thought they were ready to share the music with a larger audience than Ananda. Plans were made for a tour in December. In November, Swamiji interrupted work on his book to write more arrangements and rehearse the singers, sometimes for 8 to 10 hours a day. I know that sounds amazing, but that's what I was told by someone who was part of that group. Rehearsals always began with prayer, chanting, and meditation. Swamiji talked about voice placement and singing technique, but even proper placement, he said, comes from right consciousness. In the same way a guitar string needs a sounding board to give it resonance, so the human voice needs the sounding board of the divine. Some of the singers were nervous about the upcoming tour, so he called them together and said, "Let me give you all the reasons for you to have self-confidence. It will be nice if you sing well, be as good as you can, but that is not what will carry you. Just be yourselves. Whenever visitors come to Ananda, it is the people that make the deepest impression. The sweetness and happiness you radiate is what your audiences long to have in their own lives. It will make up for any artistic weaknesses." His hope was that their tour would help energize the community's movement. The music will give people an experience of harmony, the singers themselves of cooperation. Quote, "a graphic illustration of what otherwise would be just a theory." Cooperation not only with others, but with truth and with God. That's the message of the song, "Go On Alone," which I think is now called "Walk Like a Man." Swamiji then said, "Give special emphasis to that song. We want people to understand that Ananda is much more than a nice place to raise a family. It is a life of profound meaning, which we have chosen after deep and careful thought. But don't think your job is to get them to join Ananda. Don't try to impose on them our way of thinking. If we do, they'll just write us off as sectarian. Let them be inspired simply by who you are. Everything else follows from that. We don't have to compete on the world's terms. Meditate. Be in tune with Master. Give the audience his vibrations. Make the music your sadhana and your singing an expression of your spiritual sincerity. That's what will make it beautiful." No, wonderful. New section. In December, he wrote another issue of the Banyan Tree. The subject was communities, and Master's statement that someday this lifestyle would spread like wildfire. Swamiji was musing on how that will come about. That summer, we had organized a communities conference. 100 people came, many of them involved in communities of their own. Now, Swami writes, "I'm beginning to feel that this overall movement will not derive its main strength from inter-community cooperation. Each one is motivated by a different set of ideals. Cooperation among groups, though loving and sincere, never goes beyond the rudiments of commitment. I believe in such cooperation and will continue to promote it, but something closer to our work is needed. Otherwise, our very efforts to support the movement will be diluted by tactful compromise. Great writing. His. He then suggested launching an Ananda communities movement, inviting his readers to join. I see no way to spread the movement as widely as it needs to be spread, he wrote, if commitment is restricted to people living here. It is also misleading, for it suggests that our land and residents are all that Ananda is. In fact, these are but symbols of a much broader reality. The Ananda Communities movement embraces the ideals of our Guru, which Swamiji listed as simplicity, but not primitivism. World compassion, not world rejection. Practicality, not utopianism. Service, not self-indulgence. Love of God, not materialism. Kindness, respect, and an open heart to all. Beautiful. And then, new section, last section. On Christmas Eve, we gathered in the Common Dome where Swamiji regaled us with his reading of a P.G. Wodehouse story. He had been introduced to this British humorist when he was a schoolboy in England and had loved him ever since. Now he was sharing his enjoyment with us. He was a gifted mimic, and his accent set us and him into gales of laughter. Then outward merriment turned more inward, with Christmas carols and Swamiji's songs. There were guests from Germany. As a child, Swamiji spoke German as fluently as he did English. Together they sang some of his favorite German carols. Instruments came out for an impromptu concert. At the Christmas meditation the day before, Swamiji played some recorded music in the afternoon. Most of his music was not suitable for the occasion. So he played favorite pieces from many traditions, sitar and tabla from India, a folk song from France, a duet from an Italian opera. Then he played the Blue Danube Waltz, which Master had played every Christmas meditation. Visualize yourself in the astral world dancing with all the masters, Swamiji said. When the piece concluded, he smiled mischievously. Master always played it several times, he said. 3 or 4 times more it played. Swamiji stood near the altar, his eyes closed, swaying gracefully, keeping the rhythm with a soft clap of his hands. From the expression on his face, it was clear that everything else was forgotten. He was in the astral world with Master. Earlier in the week, I had come to see Swamiji in the middle of the day to discuss a business matter. When I arrived, he was making chapatis for his lunch, and continued on without breaking his silence. In his lecture, Swamiji often referred to inner experiences devotees may have, but he rarely made it personal. Such an aura of holiness emanated from him as he quietly prepared his simple lunch. Even the smallest task done for God becomes an act of worship.
Oh, that was really nice.
Well,
Beautiful, Asha.
okay, you think it'll work?
Oh, yeah.
It's fantastic.
Did you say it's only 800 pages?
It's humorous and it's moving and some of it's brand new.
That's wonderful.
I like that you're adding some of your life experience in there, and just a little.
I put as much as
Yeah.
matters, you know. There's no.
Just it's fun to have some of that in there as we go through.
I would put more of it in, except it brings it down. You know, I mean, I had more of my own life experience, but it's not important.
No, the amount you have is great. It grounds it.
Yeah, it
It
grounds it.
grounds it, and it's important. Otherwise, it would just get too much after 100 pages or so.
Well, yeah, every time it's relevant, I put it
Yeah,
in.
perfect.
It's wonderful to hear you read it.
Yes.
Hope
Yeah.
you'll read this, record yourself reading this book.
I'm sure I will. Yeah, actually, well, you know, It's as good as I can do it. You know, that's how I feel. I mean, when I read it, it's like it is what it is now. When you reach, everybody who does creative work knows that. You hit a point where it's what you have to give. And it really, if it's good, bad, or indifferent, it really doesn't make any difference because it's just what you have
Well, it
to
matters
give.
to us. We want it to be good and it's great. So,
Well, I become impersonal.
no, understood.
But you really evoke the reality of who Swami is and the reality of his circumstances of the time and the people around him.
Yeah. Are you up for another, or do you?
For the next week.
I think I'll skip to. I have 76 here. Let me see. Do I have 74?
You found a way for us to really just step in and feel like we're there with you. So.
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
I mean, I watched.
Did your perspective also change with time, being with Swami?
Well, my perspective changed because I was an absolute moron when I got there, and I gradually gained IQ points. So I think that helped. But my understanding of Swami's spirituality was instantaneous when I first met him. So I never had to go through anything. I mean, from the minute I met him to the last minute I ever saw him, it never changed. That's very odd. He changed. He didn't change in his consciousness, he changed in the way he presented himself. Somewhere around 2010 is a conversation between the two of us on that very point. You know, Swamiji, people always ask me if you've changed. I had the relationship with him where I could check my intuition. So I often checked my intuition. And the Kriyananda book was enormous amount of that was intuitive, and I sat next to him and he went over every word of it. So it was like he confirmed everything that I had, he did that on purpose, of course. But in 2010, I said, people are asking me if you changed, because 2010 he really started to shift. That's when Narayani really came into his life. And I said, to me, you've always been exactly the same. Your consciousness has always been the same. The way you present yourself has changed enormously. I said, that's what I say to people. Is it okay for me to say that? Yes, he said, because that's true. Because he didn't want to play the guru game, and it wasn't the right time and place for him to be grand, because there were all these people being grand all over the place. Plus, he had an enormous amount of work to do. Plus, if he had come on that way, he would have gotten people who wanted to be like that. And what he got instead was really independent, clear-thinking, strong-minded people that he was able to really develop from the inside out, instead of just our falling at his feet and then just having to sort it out from there. There were a whole lot of reasons. I don't exactly articulate all of that, but I think you feel it as you go through. You know, I don't like to hold. I'm hoping the facts will speak for themselves. It's just another way to put it. I just want to see what's in there.
Asha,
Yes.
when I feel filled with possibilities listening to this.
Thank you. That would be exactly.
So, you
Yeah.
know, it's just so, I don't know, I guess that's the best I could say, but I just feel like I could go home and do something, you know, that's beneficial to myself instead of, you know, watching the news.
Chandra, if I would never have thought to say that, but if there is one thing I would hope for this book, I think you just said it. That's the whole point. I mean, that's what it was like when you lived with Swamiji. You felt like you could do anything.
Yeah.
And he believed that we could do anything. And what I'm trying to put in here is how he did it so that we can do it.
Yeah. It somehow it comes across. Just
All right. One is bigger than the other. 76, 75, what does it matter? Okay. You know about the fire. Let me see what happens. Well, this is sort of fun. I'll read this. I'll read 75 instead. It's more. Okay, in 75, we did what we called the disaster seminars, which was how you can prepare for disaster, but we always called them the disaster seminars.
Asha, will you be putting some photos in this book?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
I'm hoping, Lakshmi's been working for months and she's been making a huge chronological archive. So whenever this is all finished, I'll sit down with her and I'll try to just pull out as many as possible, not only of him, but that will illustrate, you know, what it looked like, what people were doing, what the groups look like. A few people are mentioned in the book. Nobody has a personality in this book at all except him. And Narayani, actually. Miriam comes through toward the end, too. Miriam and Narayani in the last years are there a lot. But the rest of us, every so often our names are mentioned, but we really are just quite cardboard figures who just move in and out. Really. Oh, you know what actually might be fun? Let's just see about something. Oh, I'll just do this. I was wondering if I should just read a 2000. Okay. 75, we did the disaster seminars. He was writing the path. We started the master plan. He started the Bicentennial Liberty Committee. And then he started writing stories of Mukunda.
Which year is this?
75. So this is sequential. Swamiji continued to feel the urgency of Master's predictions about coming hard times. His contribution was to keep working on his autobiography. A book about Master could draw many people to God, the only true security. To help in other ways, Swamiji sent 6 of us on a speaking tour around Northern California. Our marketing was not subtle. The free lecture was called Trial by Fire, World Prophecies by the Great Yogi Paramhansa Yogananda, and the all-day workshop was You Can Prepare for Disaster. Even though they were a success, ever after we called them the disaster seminars. Each of us covered a specific area. Jyotish talked about communities, Devi, simple living, Binay, economic options, Shivani, growing your own food, Santosh O'Hara, different Santosh, land and shelter. My area was spiritual solutions. We were such a novelty, we got attention from the media. The San Francisco Chronicle dubbed Jyotish and I the gloom and doom duo. Although the reporter went on to describe us as more than happy, they are positively beatific. A pleasing side effect of the disaster seminars was not a disaster at all. The long-time friendship between Jyotish and Devi blossomed into romance and soon after marriage. Shivani's future husband, Arjuna, was also courting her at that time, following us from city to city. All of us had experience teaching at the retreat, but this was one of our first efforts to reach a broader audience. The crowds were small but receptive. I had some understanding of the spiritual path, but compared to Swamiji, my cup of wisdom was more like a thimble. Now on tour, sharing with others, I saw how much I did know. In any case, even a little practice of this inward religion, Krishna says in the Gita, will save you from dire fears and colossal suffering. I came to Ananda to be with Swamiji. I loved helping people, but inwardly I kept aloof from the project. I considered my detachment a virtue. One day, driving through the community with Swamiji, looking out the window, I thought, what tremendous effort it has taken to manifest each part of Ananda. Swamiji has given his life's blood to fulfill the commission given to him by Master, and how grateful I am that he did. I couldn't imagine life without Ananda. Suddenly I saw my so-called detachment in a different light. I was happy to take from Swamiji, but what was I giving in return? Yes, I cooked his meals, wrote letters, made tea, but how was I helping with the only thing that mattered to him, fulfilling his responsibility to his guru? I considered myself his friend, but how could I be, unless I made his cause my own? I resolved to become worthy of the friendship Swamiji extended so selflessly to me. New section. In the winter of 1975, Swamiji started holding Thursday night satsangs at his house. He would read us the latest chapters from his autobiography, now called The Path. Reading aloud to others and feeling their mental response often revealed weaknesses in the writing he hadn't noticed before. He kept pencil and clipboard at hand and would pause to make editorial notes. In winter, darkness came early. It rained often and snowed more frequently than it does now. We'd come bundled against the cold into the gas-lit, wood-heated dome, pulling off our boots and piling our coats on his dining room table. Swamiji always sat in a slightly padded straight chair, his back toward the large window. He dressed informally, usually dark trousers and a blue plaid wool shirt. There was some furniture, but mostly we sat on the floor around him. The dome itself is perched on the edge of a steep incline. Far below is the Yuba River. On the other side of the canyon, nothing but forest. Through the window behind Swamiji, we could see the stars, or the moonlight reflected on the clouds, the blackness of rain, or the silent white snow. Were we in 20th century California, or high in the Himalayas? How many incarnations had we spent in this way, sitting at the feet of our teacher? After he finished reading, Swamiji would ask for feedback. He wasn't just being polite, he needed input. He was so close to it, he couldn't always tell. Writing that seemed crystal clear to him was sometimes a muddle to us. We saw meanings he never intended, sometimes couldn't even imagine. He listened attentively to our comments, but if he didn't understand or didn't agree, the ensuing discussion could be lively. You had to meet Swamiji on his level of energy. Information about Master was scarce in those days. Autobiography of a Yogi and what Swamiji told us in satsangs and classes was all we knew. Now he was writing about Master, the path, and his own discipleship in ways we had never heard before. We wanted to help him, but often found the inspiration too deep for words, or not being writers ourselves, felt unqualified to comment. Swami sympathized, but after several weeks of near silence, he felt a corrective was needed. One of Sri Yukteswar's spiritual maxims was learn to behave. Swamiji said, "When I present to you something I have just created, to say nothing at all in response is not even common courtesy. I am not a television set or a Nickelodeon where you put in your coin and then watch me perform. You aren't relating to me as a person. You have created some image of me in your minds and are relating to that. Quite apart from what I may need in order to perfect this writing, it isn't good for you to take without giving back. Yes, it takes energy to come up with a response, but for your well-being, I encourage you to try." He was very stern that night. Now let's, new section. More than a year had passed since the purchase of the new land. For Swamiji, moving the retreat was urgent. He had given his word. Nothing could be done, though, until the county gave its approval. Our first master plan, we called it Master's Plan, was submitted in July 1974. The county rejected it, too vague. The second version, 6 months later, was also rejected, too detailed. Then new, expensive requirements were added: water study, environmental impact report, use permit, zoning change. Whenever we got close, the county moved the goalposts. The process was costing us a lot of money, but we couldn't use the land to generate new income. We faced a balloon payment of $12,000 with no way to pay it. In those days, that was a very large sum of money. At $50 a month, I earned twice as much as Nitai, who ran the school. When Nitai told his mother that he was working for a school now, she said, "What's your salary?" He said, $25,000. She said, $25,000 a year, that's quite good. And he just left it. So I earned twice as much as Nitai, who ran the school. In the afternoons, he made incense in the company Jyotish had started to supplement his income. In February, Swamiji sent out a letter of appeal. The projects for the new land, the retreat, the healing center, the Institute for Cooperative Living, quote, "will serve many thousands of people outside our own spiritual family. They are a loving offering to needy souls everywhere. We would like this to be our gift to others, not their gift to us. but economic realities had to be faced, so he said, Ananda needs your help. A month later, the money had been raised. Swamiji wrote, I am lovingly grateful for your generosity and your desire to share in the adventure that is Ananda, both as a place and as spiritual communities movement. Your loving cooperation is the very essence of what Ananda is all about. I thank you and the God in you with a full heart. Then he talked about the path. He had finished part 1, his life before meeting Master, and optimistically spoke of completing the whole book before the end of the year, unless his writing was interrupted by the need to fundraise for the land and for the new retreat to be built there. Quote, presently, therefore, I'm asking God, shall I go out and give classes, perhaps across the United States and Europe? You see, my way is to give him the responsibility by letting him decide. As an alternative, Swamiji said that, quote, God may elect to solve the problem. He had sent the manuscript to publishers in New York, London, Germany, and Switzerland. With a large advance, he could meet his obligations and finish the book. He also offered to send chapters of the path as he finished them in exchange for a small donation. Somehow we held on. Swami didn't have to go out and teach, but continued to work on the book. In May, though, he took a break and went to Europe to see friends, contact publishers, and take a vacation in Switzerland. A German publisher was interested in 14 Steps. A London publisher wanted Your Sunshine as a spiritual guide. No one wanted the path. By now, Swamiji had written 8 books, all published by Ananda, with combined sales of 100,000. Still, he lamented, publishers are afraid of taking this one for fear it won't sell. If necessary, we'll publish it ourselves and no doubt do well. Space. New section. The founding of Ananda coincided with a back to the land movement throughout California. We were not the only ones facing difficulties. Officials all over the state started red tagging non-conforming structures, declaring them uninhabitable according to their codes, and ordering them torn down. Trailers, teepees, and cabins all over Ananda were marked by the county. Until every existing building was brought into compliance, the planning department said, they wouldn't even consider our master plan. Turned out it was illegal to tie the two issues together, and with the help of a local attorney, we got them to back down. Still, we were no closer to getting the master plan done. Statewide, people had organized into a group called United Stand. They began to lobby in Sacramento for fundamental changes in the Uniform Building Code, rural standards for rural living. Even if you were miles from a power pole, for example, and preferred to live off the grid, the code said you still had to wire your house for electricity. Yeah. Swamiji supported United Stand, but he didn't think it would solve our problems. The planning director of the county had started as a secretary and risen through the ranks without ever receiving professional training. Her incompetence was well known. A grand jury had investigated and recommended that she be fired, but the board of supervisors refused to act. Ananda was multiple uses on one piece of land, a planned unit development. There was nothing else like it in Nevada County. The director had no idea how to deal with this. Her solution was to keep putting up roadblocks until we gave up and went away. Swamiji said, I knew Ananda's complaints alone would not be enough to get the supervisors to act. I had to make them see there was widespread opposition, which in fact there was. Many county residents had been tyrannized not only by the planning director, but by other county officials as well. Individually, their complaints fell on deaf ears. As an organized group, Ananda could do something to help them and ourselves. Taking advantage of the upcoming 200-year anniversary of America, Swamiji created the Bicentennial Liberty Committee. He, as J. Donald Walters, was president, and I, as Nan Savage, believe it or not, that was my name, I, as Nan Savage, was the secretary. Our English names were unknown in the county. Even in person, no one knew me, and very few would recognize Swamiji. He thought we would be taken more seriously if we acted as private citizens rather than as Ananda. Eventually, we revealed our identity, but only after the movement had gained momentum. Swamiji wrote a petition. 200 years ago, our forefathers fought for the right to be represented in government by people who were responsive to their needs rather than to rules and restrictions insensitively imposed from afar. In this 20th century, increasing centralization of power has raised again the threat of insensitive legislation originating similarly from afar, where the needs of the individual are ignored in favor of mass uniformity. We, the citizens of Nevada County, feel that with the approaching celebration of our country's bicentennial, it is time to affirm with some of the revolutionary zeal of our forefathers the need for personal liberty and self-direction. It went on for 2 more paragraphs, calling upon all governments, especially the county, to protect our rights to live our lives as we choose to live them and to build homes according to our tastes and inclinations, as long as we don't infringe on the rights of others or endanger health and safety. It was completely sincere. Swamiji meant every word of it. He sent those of us who were willing out to collect signatures. First, to collect signatures. First from local businesses, then he had us, we had all these businesses, and then from individuals. In a matter of days, we had thousands of signatures. To put it mildly, not everyone at Ananda was happy about the Bicentennial Liberty Committee. Many had politics in their background, some quite radical. But after coming to Ananda, not at all. The community itself had always been apolitical. Some thought the BLC, as we called it, was a breach of Dharma. Many thought it was folly to antagonize the very people who controlled our future. They feared the whole thing would blow up in our faces. Once the petitions were signed, we started a campaign of letters to the editor, systematically attacking nearly every county department. When we gathered signatures, we also gathered horror stories, dozens of them, of mistreatment by officials. Emboldened by the BLC, other citizens began to write letters too and register complaints. Nevada City, the county seat, is a small town with just 1 newspaper. The BLC made quite an impact. The tempest in a teapot, Swamiji called it. The supervisors waited a year, then quietly fired the planning director, replacing her with a competent professional. Nan Savage of the BLC became quite well known. Some people wanted me to run for supervisor from our district. It would be helpful to have someone from Ananda on the board, Swamiji said when I asked him what to do. But it wouldn't be good for you. People are more important than things, Ananda's founding principle, with where there is Dharma, there is victory. No matter how worthy a project, the first, in fact the only consideration is, will it be spiritually beneficial to those involved? Later he said it would have been foolish and pointless to flex our muscles further. It wasn't power we were after. It was simple survival, so that we might continue in the way of life to which we were dedicated. He says, my methods were creative and unanticipated, but they worked, as I am not sure anything else would have done. Our very existence as a community was being threatened. What I did was dharmic, and the only effective course I could see to take, I would do it again if the same issues confronted us. Interesting. Now, new section. Swami received a letter from a man named Richie. Richie had been thinking of joining Ananda, but first wrote to SRF asking their advice. The reader knows the outlines of the story too. Their answer caused him to doubt the validity of Ananda and Swamiji's sincerity as a disciple. Richie asked Swamiji, would Yogananda approve of Ananda under your leadership? If not, shouldn't you question your motives? Perhaps there was something in Richie's letter that inspired Swamiji to answer. Maybe it was just time to speak up. We printed his response and gave it out to Ananda members and anyone else who asked about us and SRF. Here are some excerpts from Swami's letter. A master's blessings are like the broadcasts of a radio station. Even one who owns the biggest and best radio can have no monopoly on the broadcasts. Every disciple can and should try to attune himself to his guru's inner guidance and not seek direction only outwardly. Master himself always trained us to seek his guidance primarily within ourselves. Swamiji then acknowledges the dangers of going it alone. The true disciple is not one who says, I'll do whatever the Guru says, but I refuse to cooperate with his close disciples. Swami says, I wanted with all my heart to cooperate with Master's closer disciples, but I found myself denied all opportunities to give such cooperation. I was left with no recourse but to seek all my guidance directly from Master, for my life remained dedicated to him. I had nothing else to live for but to serve him. No doors opened for me, except those which led to Ananda. It took many miracles for Ananda to come into being. Master would have needed to withhold only one of them for it to have failed utterly. I don't blame those who think of me as beyond the pale. Most don't know how desperately I tried to remain within the pale. They imagine I simply refused to be guided. Everything serious I have undertaken during these 13 years since my separation from SRF has been started only after deep prayer, in many cases over a period of years for Master's guidance. I have learned to be very impartial in my readiness to accept whatever guidance I receive from him. Ananda is not my imposition on Master's will. Left as I was completely on my own, I have had to develop a kind of independence which I myself would generally counsel people against. I haven't any doubt that Master himself engineered my dismissal, not for anyone's punishment, but because he had other things to accomplish through me. Why then should I blame anyone? I wonder rather at the greatness of Master's love. Surely I was not worthy of such great blessings as he has bestowed on me. New section. It was Swamiji's practice at Christmas to give everyone in the community a copy of his latest book. He saw the path wouldn't be ready in time, so he decided to republish a book he'd written 20 years earlier as a gift to his fellow SRF monks, Stories of Mukunda about Master's childhood. It had proved so popular, SRF then decided to publish it. Without crediting Swamiji as the author, and without his permission, they registered the copyright in their own name. When Swamiji was expelled, SRF took the book off the market. Whenever anyone asked, SRF said it was permanently out of print. In September, Swamiji wrote to Dayamata asking her to transfer the copyright to him as he intended to publish the book before Christmas. Over the years he had written her many letters. She seldom replied, so it was no surprise when he didn't hear from her. Swamiji was a much better writer now, so he did extensive revisions before putting out an informal edition for Christmas. Official publication of Stories of Mukunda would come a few months later. In December, as a gift to his mother, whose birthday was coming soon, Swamiji decided to write her a piano sonata. It was his first instrumental. He called it The Divine Romance. The secret of Swamiji's prodigious creativity was to concentrate on one thing at a time. Now, after so much writing, he found it relaxing to write melody without the needs for words. His mother was also a musician. The baby grand piano in his living room had been hers. As a young woman, she had gone to Paris to study the violin. It was there she met her husband-to-be, both Americans from Oklahoma. Ray was an oil geologist working in Europe, taking a vacation in Paris. In his teens, Swamiji had spent hours every day practicing the piano, but had played very little since. Now, day after day, he practiced the sonata in order to be able to play it for his mother when he went to visit her after Christmas. The best way to learn to play the piano, he said, is write a piece of music that is beyond your level of skill. Then practice till you can play it. New section. The Christmas issue of the Banyan Tree included a family photo signed by Swamiji and all the residents. In his dear friend's letter, he wrote, "Offering of one's will to God's guidance should be made daily. It should become a mental attitude that is carried with one constantly, an inner gift from the soul unceasingly given, until not the slightest decision is made without first asking the Lord, at least for a comment." He ended the letter saying, "The purpose of Ananda as a place is to demonstrate attitudes that can and should be a part of everyone's life, wherever one lives. Above all, Ananda, divine joy is a state of consciousness. What is truly important is to be in Ananda rather than at Ananda. My dear friends, may Ananda be ever yours, wherever you are. I think it's going to work.
I think it's gonna work.
You didn't just pick out the two best chapters today.
It's wonderful. I mean.
It does. No, I can feel it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can feel it.
It's an occasion for celebration.
Asha, are you going to have pictures from those days?
I'm going to have as many pictures as I can. I'm going to really make it good. I mean, we'll just spend whatever we need to make it good. You know, it'll be big, and I'm going to try. I want to put the pictures in the text, so that you'll turn the page and there'll be 1974 and there'll be some ish. And when I have the text clear in my mind, we can put. And because Lakshmi's been doing all this work for all this time, she's got it all. People have been turning in their pictures to her.
That's the Lakshmi up at the village, not.
Oh yes,
Sweet
not.
Lakshmi.
Excuse me.
Just so people know.
Lakshmi Selby. She was laid up with a bad knee, so she just, sat there and scanned and organized, and she's a librarian. She has an archivist temperament. She's not a librarian, but she has an archivist temperament. Well.
And maps.
This is so engaging.
And have maps, because you were talking about the new land. It would be interesting to see how the.
Yeah, in truth, actually, earlier, in the chapters earlier, I did more descriptive, so that by the time we got to there, people weren't as lost as you were. Yeah, I realized that.
The maps are a great idea.
Yeah, actually, it's true, of course.
It's easier to see it than it is to read it.
No, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, I mean, those are all the things that we'll just have fun. We'll just play with it until it.
Great.
And I also realized I've done a tremendous favor to everybody else who writes about Swami, because no one else is going to have to worry about chronology or facts. Everyone else is just going to be able to tell stories, because it's all organized here. And that's huge. I didn't do that on purpose, but now that I have done it, I realize I've spared everyone. And I've worked very hard to get. I think I might also try to do not quite like the CV that you did, but do something in the back where it's year by year what he wrote, the songs and the books, and maybe just the key events out of it, so that because then it'd be just fun. It's like it's not just us who are really interested in this, but people are going to be interested in this forever.
The books and music too.
Yeah, exactly. Because I can't really. I've tried to say he was working on this, he was working on that, and no, mostly I do because it was what was happening, and almost always, I was much more involved in SRF and writing than I was in music, and I have drawn on. My criteria is either I was there, he told me about it, or someone whose relationship to Swami is close to mine told me about it. Or wrote a letter or something like that. By that I mean that I feel like their account would have been the same account as mine. Because people have very, very widely points of view in it. Anyway, so there's some of you all appear in there. Some of you have written letters. Karen appears, because you guys were in Europe sometimes when I wasn't. I was going to read a chapter, but I realized a lot of it was your words, and that would be really boring for you. So I decided not to do that. That was some book launch in Rome or something like that.
It's beyond a recollection. The richness of the experience and the focused experience really comes through what you've written, and that's commendable, because it could have been scattered, but the focus and the richness did come through.
Thank you, Marcel. I myself, when I went back to the 70s, and then really started having to reconstruct it, restructure it is what I would say. I was surprised how much it was there. I don't take any credit for it. Now it's like, I just didn't quit. And because I didn't quit, finally, he got it through me. That's basically how I feel. Yeah, but I was surprised. I went back and I thought, my goodness, look at that. It's really there.
Yeah.
Asha, do you have a title yet for what the book is?
Well, it's the life and legacy of Swami Kriyananda.
Nice.
And that's probably when that felt to me like
Yeah.
a little overstated. I don't like to, I don't like to overname things. I don't like to name your goldfish, Shiva Shakti or something like that. It's like. But I think it really is the life and legacy of Swami Kriyananda. I'd had this other title, but what I thought of recently was the life and legacy of Swami Kriyananda. Where there is Dharma, there is victory.
That's nice. Yeah, it needs a subtitle.
Yeah.
You
And
could
I
even make it the other way around, make that
Well,
the primary title.
Originally, Dharma and Victory were the title, but that was before it became the life and legacy.
But I mean, you could make that a subtitle.
It's quite possible, and who knows? It is the life and legacy of Swami Kriyananda, if that's not overnaming it.
No.
Meaning that have I included enough to be able to claim a title like that?
I have a title I've been dying to use
Oh,
for
good.
many years. American
The
Saint.
American Saint, that's the one you've
And
always
then the
wanted.
subtitle could be The Life and Legacy, if you like. The
An American Saint.
is
American
beautiful.
Saint is beautiful.
I've longed
I know,
to use it.
and actually, you know what?
What?
He's dead now, we can use
I
it.
know.
He wouldn't let, you wanted.
No
That's
to
right.
He said no, yeah.
He said no to me, but he said it so sweetly.
No, but
No,
he's,
he said no. I felt like he left the door open a crack.
well, no, I know, because we tried to get that through with the other book, and he wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
He wouldn't take
But
it.
the look on his face was very close, but he just wouldn't allow it.
An American Saint, the life and legacy of Swami Kriyananda.
American?
Oh, that's true. That's a really good
That's a
question.
good point. Oh, yeah.
Oh
That's
dear.
a really good question.
Who asked you?
But it's not a.
It's true. He's not really.
No. Also, it's not a book where. It's not a breathless devotee's book.
Right,
There's
right.
another word for it, but I can't think what the word I'm looking for is.
Adulating.
It is.
Biography.
Yeah, but it isn't really at all. It's really because it is his legacy as much as it is his life. Because the legacy part of it, to me, is really the central message. Because he initiated so much that we need to do, or our children's children need to do. That's all there. So.
You let him and everyone that feels like speak for themselves without editing them. I mean, you have you've let the essence of them come through their words, and I trust it. I mean, not just because I know you, but that's just the feeling of the book and the truth of it that people will feel when they pick it up. That this is what. It's not just, you don't look at who, okay, the first thing I do is look at who's the author and what did they do and how is that coloring everything. I don't feel that.
But that's very, I love hearing you say those things because that's, that was where I was. I took out the parts that made it not like that. Because Swami always said himself repeatedly, don't tell the reader what they're supposed to feel. Just tell them the facts and let them draw their own conclusions. That's how he taught us. He would tell us. There's a section. It comes in the 80s. So I guess I must have been working on it. So it must have come in the early 80s. This man named Jeff Green started an Ananda group in Seattle. And I went up there. It was right after the incorporation, so that would have been 82 or something. And Jeff was a character. He had his own realities going on, which was something different. But he'd also been part of SRF, so he wrote this letter to SRF, and he asked them, how come you guys are so down on Ananda? And then he got a letter back from Sister Janaki, who had spoken with Sri Dayamata. And Sri Dayamata had told her to tell Jeff these certain things. So what the message was, those who were close to Master know exactly what he wants, and they're doing exactly what he wants, and when he wants them to do something else, they'll know and they'll do something else. That was the answer. You know, in other words, don't you think we ought to know we were with him? And Swami's answer is, well, Master tried this community and he did this in Encinitas and this is what happened. And I think the reason it didn't work is because it was too close to the Depression. And so they weren't ready for it. And then the monastics had this particular attitude. But then he talked about, I mean, he'd give you 40 pages of all the different things that Master said about it, what Master might have meant, how he might have contradicted it over here, how Swami felt about it, what he said on another occasion. And then there you were. You had an encyclopedia in front of you. And then Swami would say, this is what he decided to do, but you always knew why. And even if he was telling you, this is what Master said, or this is what I felt, you always knew why. Even if it was intuitive, he would then build some kind of a reasonable structure. So at the end of it, you knew how to think. And SRF, every answer they gave, and it's just a different approach, you know, but it's really a different approach. But that was the most dramatic. It's just, you know, here's this long answer, and it always came down to, we were with him, and we know, don't worry, we've got it covered. When it's time for communities, we'll know, then we'll do it. Yeah, it's quite an adventure. The SRF thing, last time I talked to you, I was more confused about it, partly because I had just done the lawsuit. When I get to the 90s, I'm going to actually take a lot of that out. I did too much. When I started back at the beginning, I think that the SRF thread is just going to work. And it's going to work the way it's meant to work, which is there are different ways to be disciples. And one way of being disciple is that there's authority and you work under the authority. And the other way to be a disciple is you have to figure it out for yourself. And I haven't read any of those parts, but because of that, there was enormous chaos at the beginning of Ananda about Swamiji's leadership. Just enormous chaos that just went on and on and on. And actually it continued about every 5 years. You know, in the early years, he built the publications building in 1971, and that caused a whole bunch of people to leave. I mean, the publications building, which is now Hansa Temple, but it was a big deal. 1976, the fire took a lot of people out. 1981, Swami stopped being a monk. That took a lot of people down. There was something happened else in the mid-80s. Maybe that was enough. In 1990, pardon me, they got married, yeah. And then he married Rosanna. It was 1981 was when it really, by 85 we were kind of adjusted. In 1990, SRF sued us. And that was a big one. And then in 1994, Anne Marie Bertolucci sued us. And so each one of these is the spiral staircase. Because each one of them, you would have to ask yourself one more time, does he know what he is doing? You know, when he changed our name to Church of Self-Realization, and immediately we end up in this lawsuit. And I mean, it's comical because 3 days, I think, before the lawsuit was served, Swami has a meeting with the Yoga Fellowship, which is the leadership group, in which he shares the exchange of letters between the SRF attorneys threatening to sue us and John Parsons. And then we hadn't heard anything from them. And so I guess it's all over, Swami says. And then 3 days later we get this lawsuit that was, came in a 5-pound box. But, it looked like Swamiji had made that happen, which he did. And so does this man know what he's doing?
It was really hard when he changed the name to the Ananda Church of Self-Realization. Not to think, this is nuts.
Yeah, a lot of people thought it was nuts. I was living here, and I guess before the meeting, because I wasn't at the meeting, about 3 days, Swami's way was when he was going to do something, he would usually tell a good core group of people in advance and let you work it out. So by the time he was telling everyone, he had a little support in the room. It's just intuition. So I wasn't there, so Durga calls me. She said, Swami wants to change our name. Self-Realization Fellowship. I mean, I just said like that. She said, how did you know? But he did Church of Self-Realization. He didn't do fellowship. But I just knew that's what he was going to do. But I think...
Before? What was the official...
God realization.
What was our name before?
What was the official...
The legal entity... No,
Fellowship
that came afterwards. The legal entity was the Yoga Fellowship. But we had no we weren't a church. I mean, we were just Ananda. We were a country community. Part of the reason he changed it was because we had gotten this property, and we'd started here. We were really moving. I don't know if San Francisco House was still going. Sacramento was moving. You know, things were happening. We were becoming a church. And we just needed to be different. He did it because God told him to do it. He did it because, let me just try to get this out. Because he needed to do his work as he knew it meant to be done, and he could not just stand there and worry about what SRF was going to do. And Master's religion is self-realization. He said, you know, I'm a disciple. What else could I call it? As a disciple. That was just as simple as that. And the reason he didn't do it before was he kept thinking that SRF was going to come around. And so he wanted to not make that impossible. Otherwise, he would have started right off with self-realization. But when it became increasingly obvious, which I hope will build up through the book, that they were never, ever, ever, ever going to reconcile with him, he thought, well, my first duty is to Master, and I need to carry it out. And if I'm going to stand up and represent Master, what could I call it except self-realization? I mean, again, see, he reasoned it all out with us. You know, as this, what are we going to call it? So we called it God realization by the court for a while, and we experimented with other things. But I mean, and then he explains at great length, you know, why Master chose self-realization and why it's the only possible name for what we're doing. That's what I mean. Again, so by the time he's the one who had the nerve to do it and knew it was the time, but his logic was impeccable. And I suppose he knew they would sue us. But the lawsuit was the making of Ananda. Absolutely. We were children when we went in, and we were disciples when we came out. Yeah, we were just Also, it was persecution, and persecution, we were the darlings of the spiritual movement. Well, before the Bertolucci lawsuit. I mean, we were wonderful. Everybody loved us. We were just the best thing going. And it's really easy to think that you're committed when everybody thinks you're terrific. So it's quite different when everybody thinks that you're scum and being deluded by a madman. And then you have to actually ask yourself if you are.
It was clearing, just like the flyer. I mean, we lost 120 people. You know, through the lawsuit, they just moved out of the village, and it was just like the fire. The people who were really committed stayed, and the people who were there because the housing was now nice. After this all blew up, they all left. So.
Persecution is real good for you. No, we're here. I mean, we were, those of you who lived here, which were many of you, when the Bertolucci lawsuit, which was the Ananda's morally reprehensible and the worst of the pack is Swami Kriyananda lawsuit, which happened in Redwood City and was on the front paper of the Palo Alto Daily every day. It was just really good. It was super. Like, what do I really believe? Why am I here? You know, eat my body, drink my blood. Jesus cleared house really neatly too.
But then he had to leave room for people to go through the process themselves, and gave them freedom to do that. And I bet he was sad when some of the people dropped off. I mean, you know, those of you who stayed with him and of us.
But Ananda has always been concentric circles, and the inner core has been amazingly stable over 40 years, and the outer ring just moves and moves and moves and moves.
I guess I'm saying that each person has to go through something in themselves, and he knew that, and he gave them freedom to do that. And I bet in certain cases there was but he knew it.
The way part of the way I try to deal with the difference between SRF and Ananda is when spiritual authority and your own experience don't match, what do you do? And I just said, and it's not a question you answer once. You have to ask that question and answer it over and over. And I give it some energy because, I'm sitting there and realizing spiritual authority is really important. And so I talk about it. It's not like you can't relate to it, but what do you do when they don't match? And I don't answer the question, I just say that, and then it just comes back again, and it comes back again, it comes back again. Yeah, what do you do? And SRF has an answer, and there's a tremendous religious tradition as to what the answer is. Obedience. And it's not an invalid tradition by any means. But it is a question that you just have to ask over and over again. Well, dear souls, you've all been very patient. Thank you very, very, very much. I actually think that I'm going to finish this book, so it's not going to be just like an endless cycle of going away and coming back. I think a couple of more months of seclusion. But I'm going to be mostly here through Easter. I'm going to try to see if I can pull out a few weeks in January.
Say that again louder. People missed it. Say that again.
I will be here almost all the time until Easter. I hope to take a couple of weeks out in January, not go all the way to Washington.
That's maybe okay.